Hello, and welcome to the research lecture for Weber State Debate created by the Debate Boutique. I'm Victoria. I am a research and argument strategist at Debate Boutique, and I'm really excited to talk with you all about research today. I think research is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, something that I really both enjoy about debate, but I also think is a very important skill for everyone to get out of debate. So let's dive in. So before I talk about the objectives, I'll talk about some of the processes I went through when I was thinking about research. So thinking about research, I not only pulled from my experience, of course, as a debater and as a coach, both in the high school and collegiate level, but also really thought about as a judge, someone whose job it is to evaluate evidence and arguments. What was I looking for in research? How did I think that argument should be put together? And then moving on, I thought about what I, as someone who works for an urban debate league, the largest policy urban debate league in the country, and really thought about how did I teach students and coaches to research, right? And being the person that puts together the core files and puts together the evidence packet, right? What sort of things was I hoping to teach the students through the core files? And thinking about what research means to me, not just in the form of cutting cards, but thinking about what research actually means, right? What do I hope that debaters get out of this experience, right? You are, so I've proven, I think, a debater for only kind of a short period of your life that you're actually debating, but who you are as a debater and everything you learn and take out of that experience impacts your life for decades to come. And so the question is, what role do we want research to play in that? Play in who you become, and the sort of advocate you are and teacher you are, and just adjudicator, not just in debate rounds, but in life, and how you evaluate arguments and evidence, I think is so important. Um, and then lastly, thinking about some of the conversations that I've had with other staff members of Debate Boutique, thinking about how we want to reframe and rethink of research. Which brings me to my first objective, which is redefining and really rethinking what research is in the context of debate and life and what we want everyone to get out of this experience of debate. And the second is evidence and debate. The why. What are our goals? Why are we doing this? Why are we cutting cards? Why are we researching in forms that aren't just cutting cards in debate? Third is what makes good evidence? What are we looking for? What are our hopes, dreams, goals, all of that? The fourth is the process of research. Fifth is something that I think is important and not talked about nearly enough, which is about tagging evidence when you're doing the research, when you're cutting those cards. The purposes of the tag, really thinking again about that why. And then lastly, doing some practice, really getting our heads in the right spaces here, and utilizing some of those things that we've learned. So now, redefining research. So after I go through the description of this, I do want you to actually pause this video and actually do this. So when we think of the word research, what do we think of? I want you to write either on a Word document, a Google Doc, or actual piece of paper, or a sticky note, whatever you have around, right? Whatever you're using. And think about, what do you think about when you hear the word research? First, in a colloquial English sense, what do you think of when you hear the word research? But then secondly, what do you think of when you hear the word research in the context of debate? Right. So I want you to have those two: research in the English sense, and then research in the debate sense, right? I want you to make those two lists and then unpause this video once you've created those. Now that you've unpaused the video, and now you're back with me, and you have those two lists. First, the basic meaning of research, and then the debate meaning of research. So actually starting with the debate meaning of research. Too often when debaters mean research, they only mean cutting cards, right? What we find in open evidence, making a 1AC. Yes, I've done so much research. See, I created a whole new disadvantage. Boy, have I researched. That's not really what it means to research. And I think thinking like that really short sights a lot of why we debate. Like, what research skills are we really getting? Like, and what, other than being a debate coach, there's very few situations in which you're really told to just reformat an article in verbatim with the Calibri 10 font and bold and underlined, make everything else 8-point font, and put a 13 font tag on it. That's not as applicable unless you really think about the why. Like, what skills are you getting? Why are you doing that? All of that becomes so important. So for Merriam-Webster, which I think is always a good place to start when we're defining anything or redefining, right? Breaks down the noun research to three different ways. First is careful or diligent search. Second is studious inquiry or examination. And the third is the collecting of information about a particular subject. Now, cutting cards and making debate files is really about the third, right? But the process of research and how we want to think about research are so heavy in those top two. So much of research exists in really carefully searching. And then you examine and inquire about things, right? It's about being with students and being studious, right? Debate is fascinating in the fact that unlike something like football where people do it in high school and then college and then play pro, there is really no such thing as a pro debate league, right? So it's really what you learn along the way, but always when you're a debater, you're first and foremost a student. And so I think taking that student approach is so important, right? And then lastly, about collecting the information about a particular subject, right? This doesn't just mean cutting cards though, right? It means taking notes, writing examples, right? Whenever in class examination, when your opponent asks you a specific question, you're able to come back with those answers right on the fly. That is what makes you look good, and that really is what helps you win debate rounds. It's not all just in you have the most fire evidence in the entire debate round, because if you're winning the content of the debate and really are the ones who know the most about the subject and just schooling them in every cross-section, every speech, then your judge isn't even going to read the evidence most of the time. Right? So what matters is that you have searched and studied and then collected. And that's what it means to do research, right? It's about reading the articles and understanding the terms and the examples and the historical studies and being able to cite those in a concise and easy to follow and easy to understand way. That's what it means to research, is understanding files. Files are only as good as your ability to employ them in a debate round. And if you don't understand the thesis of the arguments that your authors are making, the thesis claims, and the way that the argument is set up, they're not very helpful. They're not going to be that useful. If you can't understand even the basic link chain, the internal links of a disadvantage, that file isn't as helpful, right? Because at the top of the Q&R, your judge is going to want to be walked through even a very basic disadvantage, and that's going to help you win so many debate rounds. So understanding your file, understanding the literature base, being able to withstand any questions that come about it and explain it in so many different ways. Your judges aren't as deep in the literature as you. Much like small children, we need things explained to us 5 different ways and in different examples until we finally get it. Don't think that we know what we're doing. We really don't, as debate judges here in the back of the room or the side of the Zoom or whatever we are anymore. That we need things explained in as many ways as possible and as concretely and as really as fully as possible, right? And whenever that happens, then you win more debate rounds. You look so much better, get higher speaker points, right? This is why we do the research. That it's so important to do this. And because instead of relying on pre-written blocks and relying on things your coaches have written, you rely on your own information and you're able to answer even things you weren't ready for on the fly. Because you know the answers, you know the thought process, you're able to think like the literature wants. And because of that, you're going to do so much better in these debate rounds, even if you're not completely prepared for the other team's arguments, because you are more prepared than they will ever be, because you are the experts of your subject matter. And that's going to be so important, to be able to fully explain things, even in the light of any other arguments that the other team is making. That becomes so important. The best way to do that is to truly understand what you're debating. Now I'm going to force you to work on this concept. So with redefining research, right, this is now a task, an activity. After I get done explaining this, Again, you're going to pause this video and do this, or put this off for another thing. Again, this is going to be a much longer activity, so it's okay if you want to keep going and then go back to this in a few days. That's okay. I understand you all are busy. So first, I want you to think of a topic within debate that you might want to run next year, keeping in mind that this next topic in college is going to be a domestic topic. So maybe that's more critical. So maybe that's disability studies or imperialism, or more political, like political capital theory. As again, with Biden in the White House is going to be much bigger than it was in a Trump presidency. Maybe it's the state of the US judicial system and understanding all these processes. I know I, for one, did not learn nearly enough in high school civics class. Given that this is a domestic topic, this court's counterplans and court asks are not going anywhere. So understanding how all of that works. Had it not been for debate, I really wouldn't have known that the Supreme Court only announces decisions in June. I just thought it was coincidence that it kept happening during debate camp. Turns out that's how the Supreme Court works. Who knew? Except everyone who actually knew things about civics, which I did not. So learn about that. Put yourself in a better position than I was. The key 2022 midterm elections, right? What states do the Democrats need to win? What states do the Republicans need to win? What seats are up for re-election in the Senate? Things like that. It's a 50-50 Senate. Very, very tight. Could not be tighter. So you want to really know what those key elections are, because those are going to come up. And then lastly, I think just understanding, again, one of these big civics concepts about federalism. I think with that debate, I also would have had no idea what was happening there. So find a book chapter or a law review or an academic journal. Again, these can be just parts of those if those are longer articles, or a long article from a think tank that really goes into describing a situation. And so focus for this, I want you to focus on the descriptive claims. What claims about the world as it is this chapter or article really talking about, right? And so go into it with a descriptive mind. What am I learning from this about how the world is? We'll learn later and talk later about looking for solvency advocates and things like that. But right now, think about the descriptive claim. And read for understanding, whatever that looks like for you. I really hate highlighting things. I really, really don't like it. But maybe you love highlighting. So maybe it's a physical book and you want to highlight. Maybe it's online article that you want to highlight. I can't even highlight on online articles. I really can't highlight. Or maybe you want to take notes, whether that's on your computer or sticky notes or physical notebook. Again, whatever works for you. And I want you to really read for understanding, focusing on those descriptive claims. Now, after this, I bolded after this because it's really important that it's not simultaneous or before. It's after this that you think about the applicability in debate rounds. And I want you to start thinking about that. But again, only after you read for understanding, and don't pick something because you want to think about it as an affirmative, right? Learn first for understanding about the actual broad topic, right? Because I think all of these topics and whatever else you're thinking of, I think will be very important to just know about, right? More knowledge is not bad in the situation. Like, you want to know as much as you can about these topics. You can pause that, you can come back to that, whatever you want here. But now we're going to move on. So now moving on to, why is evidence important? Why do we want evidence in debate? So first, I want you to take a moment, think about what are some of the reasons you think evidence is useful in debate. Maybe it's the type of judges you've had, right? Think that evidence is useful. Maybe you think it's the only way to make arguments in debate, or you've been more policy leaning, so that's what you've always done. Or maybe it's because you want to tap into broad literature bases, or honestly, a lot of times authors just say it better than I'm able to. Or maybe it's because you legitimately enjoy cutting cards. I like cutting cards a lot, right? Maybe it's to pull from people who just have more experience than you in these, and to help develop the arguments in concise ways and have something prepared and ready to read, because at least I like to be prepared when I go into something, right? I don't want to wing it. I mean, I did extemp in high school, but even then I was very prepared and very planned. So those are some of the reasons. Hopefully you have a lot more reasons why you think evidence is important in debate. But one of the ways I like to think about it is all of the reasons for why evidence is important in debate comes down to one of the three modes of persuasion, according to Aristotle, right? It's like a little triangle. So there are three modes of persuasions, or three parts of persuasion. So there's pathos, which is the emotional parts of persuasion, ethos, which is the credibility parts, and then logos, which is the logical parts. So in debate round, the pathos is the emotional side. So maybe that's about a big impact, even explaining what happens in the world of climate change, or maybe that's part of a narrative, and just feeling that. And in the evidence sense, it can be a narrative and bringing in that voice and those emotions of people who aren't even in the debate round, right? It's not always just about the 5 people in the room or in the Zoom call or whatever. It's about those outside the space, those who are affected and those who are impacted by what we do, what we say, the policies, the lack of policies, the epistemologies we use, right? And that's what you really want to bring into the debate round with pathos, so your evidence. There's different voices. And secondly is the ethos, right? This is the credibility. One of the easiest ways to bring the ethos into the debate round, of course, is highly qualified authors. So these might be college professors, legal scholars, scholars in their field, people who are personally impacted by these things, policy experts, politicians even, think tank analysts, academic researchers, all of these things, right, that have the ethos. They have PhDs in these fields. They've studied them for decades, all of that, as well as your evidence just being backed by something, right? Having that credibility, having the peer-reviewed nature of these articles, right? That they've gone through quality check, versus the things that come out of college students' mouth have not always gone through quality check, but peer-reviewed articles have. And then lastly is that of ethos. Sorry, is logos, which is the logic. And so these are going to be your statistics, your causal explanations, the studies that it's pointing to, all of those logical components, right? That's what you're going to get from the logos. And that is, I think, something that evidence really excels at. But I think it's also important that evidence is not just logos, right? That when you're reading evidence, you're thinking about the ethos, you're thinking about the pathos, you're thinking about the picture that it paints for the judge and paints for your opponents, that you're thinking about the credibility, the why you're bringing in the evidence. Why is it important that others are saying this? Why is it important that it's in a peer-reviewed journal? All of those questions that evidence really provides answers to, and provides those modes of persuasions beyond just logos. Evidence is not sheerly logical. There's reasons that even if you were to say these things as analytical arguments, right, they might not hold the same level of weight, the same quantity here. And that's because of a lot of the benefits that we're getting and just the art of persuasion when we're reading evidence by especially experts in the field, and why evidence is so important in debate rounds. I think research is also a very good driver of the innovation, right? So innovation is good in debate. So there's, I think, 2 main reasons that I'm at least thinking of. First is the competitive incentive. Obviously, you want to skirt around as much of the pre-round prep as your opponents have done, and you want to kind of outsmart them and outplay them and outmaneuver them. And the best way to do that is just know more about the topic than they do, and just know more about what's happening than they do. It helps you really be more competitive, play the chessboard a little bit better. And I think most important reason, I would say, is that it's just fun. It's just fun to innovate and debate. You get to choose arguments that you care more about, arguments that you know more about than anyone else, and what you find fun. And I think that's a really important reason to be innovative. It's enjoyable. I like doing research. I like doing what no one else is doing. And the best way to do that is just research. No more than your opponents. You get to read a lot more fun arguments. It's not fun to read the same thing as everyone else. Now looking at the types of evidence. So there are 3 main kind of claims or types of evidence, types of claims that your evidence can be making. So first is the descriptive. This type of evidence describes what is, or it tells what is of the world, right? It describes something. Second is the predictive. This predicts something or says something what will be. And then the third is the normative, or what should be. It makes a normative claim about what ought to be. So whenever you are trying to find evidence and thinking about how it functions in your debate argument, you want to think, what is the goal of your evidence? Why? Why are you doing this? And is it because you want to describe something, describe the world as it is, maybe uniqueness claim? Do you want to predict? Is it an internal link chain? Do you want that causation? Do you want to say that X leads to X? Right? Then you're looking for predictive claim. You're looking for normative claim. What should happen? What ought to happen? Right? Is that what you're looking for? So really think about the goal of the evidence. What do you want the evidence to say? Because that'll help you look for what type of claim you want and know if a card isn't good for its purpose. It might be a really good piece of evidence. It might just not be the evidence you're looking for that purpose. And that's okay. Just because it's a good evidence, good piece of evidence, don't try to make it fit where it doesn't, right? The whole, square peg and round hole thing, right? It's like that. Like don't try to force even good evidence into a place where it doesn't belong. Really think about what type of claim do you want to be making here. And then you can, build it around that and look for that specific type of claim. Now, all of these examples that I'm about to go through come from the money bail case that I cut for the UDL last year. So sorry about that. But first is the descriptive claim, right? And so as we talked about that describes a thing. So we're looking at this specific example that is a descriptive piece of evidence, right? It talks about how maintaining pretrial detention or bail costs $140 billion a year. And it talks about it being a great expense. Everything in this piece of evidence doesn't say what ought to happen. It's just merely making descriptive claims. Now there's a tone of that it thinks that pretrial detention is terrible because it's very expensive and just ridiculous. But its claim is descriptive. It is describing the world as it is, right? Making descriptive claims about it being a great expense. Talking about, the $38 million per day. Talking about the $14 million is used to detain people who are low risk. All of that, right? It's giving these numbers and adding them up and describing the world as it is, right? This is a piece of evidence that has a lot of logos, right? A lot of logic. It adds up all these numbers for you and explains why it's expensive. It's making a descriptive claim about the world. It's not saying what ought to be done and what will be done. It's just making a descriptive claim about the world as it is. Next, we have a predictive claim. Good old Khalilzad in 2011. Khalilzad just keeps writing. This is his 2011 piece. And so this makes a predictive claim about what happens when U.S. policymakers fail to act and allow, how dare they, allow other countries to grow in power. And so it says that it's not a question of whether it will happen, but when will it happen. It says, uses world order will emerge. It says hostile states would be emboldened. All of those verbs that make you realize that it's making a predictive claim, right? And so, all of those words that really help describe that it is predicting, but what will happen in the future. That's how we know it will be a predictive claim. Predictive claims make really good internal link or impact evidence, right? Because you want cause of something, right? That's what an internal link or link chain is. And you want these predictive claims, especially for impact, right? Because that's how you know that it would create a war if we were to do this. And that's what Khalilzad is claiming here. And so that's a good piece of predictive evidence because it predicts an outcome. Next is a normative claim, which is how the world should be. And so this piece of evidence talks about the rule of law must be or should be free of racial discrimination in the judicial system. So this talks about, must be objective and free. And that it's because it's a last resort and it remedies human rights abuses. And then it goes on and explains that. And it says that, our voice to support the demand of concerned U.S. citizens to reform, right? So it's giving the normative claim about what should happen, what must happen, what ought to happen. So the rule of law ought to be free of racial discrimination or it fails. And then that is very important to protect the human rights in the country. Right? So it's making a claim about what should happen, right? A very normative claim in this piece of evidence. And so now thinking about what makes a piece of evidence good, right? So the first thing that makes a piece of evidence good, well, the most important thing to make a piece of evidence really a piece of evidence, is going to be the claim, warrant, impact. You want a clear claim, warrant, impact. As someone who judges far too many policy rounds, far too many policy rounds, where I see teams, not to call out specific schools, but you know who I'm talking about, you know the schools, you know them, that they don't cut cards that include warrants. They just claims. Bill will pass. Manchin will vote for it. I don't know why Manchin will vote for it. I don't know why he wouldn't vote for it. It just says the lines they need to. They highlight them. They read it. They move on. Well, that's all the counterplan evidence says. It doesn't tell me why. It doesn't give me the warrants. It doesn't give me the impact. I don't know what to do with this piece of evidence. At the end of the day, it's simply making a claim. It doesn't have warrants. I don't understand why it's going to happen. I also don't know the impact. I don't know why I care why it's going to happen. They just give me a claim. That's not evidence. Those unspecified policy schools, again, not going to call out any specific school here. I've judged them all. They all do this. Just giving me the claim. I don't know what to do with it. Those debaters could have just said those words and sure, the infrastructure bill will pass. Okay, but I wouldn't know why. I don't know why based on what they read to me. You never want a piece of evidence that doesn't give a warrant. That is the purpose of evidence, is to tell me why, to give me evidence, to give me reasons. Evidence is reasons. Reasons are warrants. I need warrants. Your evidence needs clear warrants. Don't under-highlight those. Those are so important. Your evidence also needs impacts. Why do I care? What happens? What does this cause? What does this do? Why the hell do I care? These are things that I need. And too often, lacking from evidence. Evidence doesn't just make the claim in bold statements, right? Evidence makes the warrants, gives you real evidence for the claim, which is the most important part of evidence. Otherwise, it's just an analytic. It has no other power if you don't have actual warrants. This is so important. That's all you get out of what evidence has. It is claim, warrant, impact. So important. Oh my gosh. Okay. Now that we're done with that one, let's talk about other things that good evidence has. Now, this is a list that good evidence doesn't have all of these. This is just what we strive for with good evidence, right? So the first is supported claims, and as much support as possible, right? You want those good warrants. Again, everything should have warrants, but you want very well supported claims. Each claim it makes, you want to be directly supported. Like, show me the line of the evidence, right? You want to be able to answer that question in cross-ex clearly. And so you want your piece of evidence to have strongly supported claims that you can point to that line in evidence that says that in cross-ex when that's asked. Second is you want it qualified, if possible. You want whoever is writing it to be a reasonable human, to be talking about this, right? And to have credentials and have that ethos part that we just talked about. Third is you want it to be conclusive. You want it to not just lay out things. You want it to have a specific point. You want everything to lead to the claim. And importantly, you want the article to be conclusive and definitely not conclude the other way. You do not want your opponent to be able to look up this article, look up this book, and realize the conclusion part goes the opposite of what you were trying to present. Be very important. You want to be academically honest, and you also don't want to be in a situation where you lose the debate round because even your own author does not agree with you. You want it to be conclusive. It's very important. Fourth is, this is just kind of a silver bullet, if you can make this happen, is comparative, right? You want it not to just say this thing will happen, but also maybe this is the only thing that can happen, or this is better than the alternatives, or things like that. That's really what you want, right? There's the Bosterman 2002 evidence that was really hot when I started debating. I guess no one's read it probably in a decade, but really good piece of evidence, right? That talks about how only US-Russia war leads us to extinction because the nuclear arsenals are so large, right? They together have like 95% of the nuclear arsenals, or at least it did in 2002. I don't know if that's still true, probably not. But at that point, the piece of evidence said this is the only war that could possibly lead us to extinction. It's the one war that we have to care about stopping, right? That is so comparative. That's what you're looking for. Maybe not necessarily that kind of guy, but that's the sort of claim that you're looking for. And then lastly, if you can get it, and if it matters. Some things it doesn't matter as much about. But if it matters, you really want to focus on recency, right? You don't want a piece of evidence that says a bill is going to pass from 3 months ago, right? Because a lot has changed in our political climate. We talked about the 2022 midterm disadvantage, right? You don't want to be pulling evidence from a year ago about those Senate races because that's really not going to be relevant anymore because, again, so many things change. But there are some specific things that things haven't really changed that much. Bell hooks evidence from the 70s is just as good as it was then, right? Like, it's still relevant. And so thinking about recency, but also not giving too much weight to recency, really think, has this changed since then? And if the answer is yes, then find a newer piece of evidence. But if the answer is no, then feel free. Go ahead, use, older evidence, because if it's still relevant, it's still relevant. Now we're going to look at the example. Again, Galilzon 11. It's just really a great example of this. So we're going to look at how it compares to all of those things that we just listed. So first, does it have supported claims? Yes, I think so. It talks about if the US policymakers fail to act. It talks about the geopolitical competition and the failures of multipolar institutions produced great wars, and it talks about arms races and crises and retrenchment. Okay, yes, that seems supported claims, yes. Is it qualified? I say yes, depending on your definition of qualified. Again, Galazad again was U.S. ambassador to countries in the Middle East, and director of the policy planning at the Defense Department. Maybe you think that just makes them like a war hawk. Probably is, but whether or not you think that's qualified, again, up for debate. Probably a good debate to be had. But regardless, yes, one could say qualified to talk about this. Is it conclusive? Yes, he definitely agrees with this. He's definitely not going the other way. He definitely concludes that hegemony necessary to prevent war. Yes, he does. Is it comparative? Yes. He talks about how unipolar world is important and U.S. hegemony is important to prevent war. But in comparison, multipolar international systems produce both world wars. So yes, definitely compares the two. Not just that U.S. system is good, but that the alternative is really bad. And recency does not win recency. 10 years old is probably too old for these purposes, right? So that's how you check. That's how you look for the good evidence. And U.S. hegemony is 2011 too old? Probably yes, because what former President Trump did to U.S. hegemony and leadership, all sorts of things, right? So that's a question to be had, right? So it's one of the situations where you ask, have things changed? And the answer is maybe. I don't know. It's worth looking into. And so that's what you want to ask whenever you're asking yourself questions of recency. Now the process. Here we are talking about the research process. So the first thing, read more. We already talked about this in the drill, in the activity, but read. The best way to get better at research is to read more. It's annoying, especially if you're one that wants to just get started, start cutting your new affirmative for next year, start cutting that dissat. You want to just hit go, right? But you have to read first. You need to know the search terms. You need to know what you're looking for. It's so hard to scrape together an affirmative if you don't know if you have the evidence to say it, if you don't know that the literature supports it, if you don't know the search terms to look for. Really let the evidence speak to you, right? And then when you read more, you also honestly less reliant on evidence. You're less reliant on other people's words because no matter what the other team is telling you, you can go back and you can answer that because you have in-depth knowledge on whatever you're producing, the topic, whatever area, whatever literature base that you're talking about, whatever affirmative you're talking about. It's so important to read first. First and foremost, you need to read. Read more. Read books. Read articles. You can skim. Skimming is good. Don't underestimate skimming. Skimming is really important, right? Learn the general ideas. Learn the terms that are used. Learn the term of arts. Understand who the important people in the area are. Understand maybe possible advantage areas, right? Start looking for search terms, right? Something as simple as global warming has, climate change and, atmospheric conditions and extreme weather. and droughts. Like those are things that you're looking for whenever you're researching global warming, right? When you're researching climate science, you're not just looking for quote global warming in quotations, right? You're looking for so much more. And you just want to find, global warming leads to extinction doesn't really exist, as much in the literature as it does in the debate community, right? So looking for things such as, humanity's survival and climate change and extreme weather conditions, like those are what's going to be important to like learn those search terms, right? And then start looking at the footnotes of what you're reading, right? Skim, look at footnotes, look at works cited, right? And the reverse, which are articles that cite the work that you're looking at. Google is really great in having, in Google Scholars, when you're able to click on an article and then click on the articles that cite that article. Because one thing that guarantees is that those articles, because they cite the previous article, are more recent. They come after, but make a lot of the same claims because, again, they're citing that article, which means you're going to get that recency, right? You're going to get someone else's spin. And ultimately, when you're a debater compiling a case and researching and making a file, that's what you're doing, right? Is you're using that as a works cited. And so someone else just did some of that work for you, maybe. And so you want to go that way too, right? And look at those original studies, know more about those original studies. Because again, when you know more, you're just going to be better in the debate round, right? You're going to be able to pull more examples. And when you ask questions on cross-sects, you're going to know the answer. And then once you do that, you create a to-do list, right? You sort of finding advantage areas and impact areas, and whether that's policy or more critical, what impacts can you pull from? What stories can you pull from? Read more in the literature. What pieces of evidence do you need? Do you need, maybe you're cutting an affirmative, the advantage areas and the solvency advocate, or you're cutting a critique. You need the alternative solvency, and you need the links, and you need the extra impacts, and you need the answers to the perm, and all of those things, right? So start making the to-do list, right? Which is really important. Once you first let the literature and let the research speak to you, right? Don't try to fit it into a mold that won't work. Really start thinking about it. And what is the research trying to tell you? Now let's talk about the wiki. Now, people might disagree with me about the wiki being part of a research lecture, right? But let's talk about the wiki's role, right? The wiki's role is not to be the entirety of your research, right? I don't think downloading things from open source is the entirety of your research, right? But it's an important part, right? It's a good starting point. And I know we don't have a topic yet, so we don't even have anything on the wiki, right? But before the season starts, there's an active wiki yet. But there is, however, something that is somewhat similar to the wiki that you should be looking at before the first tournament starts, which is the ADA novice packet. Now, the ADA each year creates a novice packet. And so what happens is a bunch of coaches that are maybe not in the POL, maybe they're in the POL. I don't know. Again, up to you to decide that. And so the ADA coaches, say 6 of them, come together and they all talk about what do they think is going to be the biggest affirmative on the topic for the policy folk. And so then they get together and they cut this and they find the best cards they can on this. And they find the, off-base positions they think people are likely to read. So going into this tournament, you should absolutely be prepared that that affirmative is probably going to show up in a lot of those policy teams. At the very least, it's going to show up in the novice division and it's going to show up somewhere on the wiki. People are going to read it. So you should be absolutely ready to debate that. And you should be also looking for that for inspiration about the topic and make sure you have links to that and make sure you have, 2ACs to the off case that they've presented, all of that, right? So the ADA novice packet can really serve as the wiki, if you will, for the first tournament. And after, of course, look at the actual wiki. But the wiki is an important part of the research process, right? I think it's an important starting point, right? It's a starting block to really get those wheels turning and really start thinking about the topic, right? Think about not only your interpretation of the topic from your own research, but what others are thinking, right? It allows you to have that broader conversation with, tens of people, but without, actually having to talk to them, which is sometimes really nice, and really allows you to be inspired and really think about the arguments from different angles and what other people are interpreting the topic to mean. Or not interpreting the topic to mean. and the anti-FT violations. And it helps prepare against the innovation that's already starting, right? From tournament one, innovation is moving, innovation is going. And so you want to be ahead, on top of the innovation, and preferably ahead of the innovation to the extent that you can be. And checking the wiki is a very good way to make sure that you are prepared against the innovation that has already existed on the topic, right? Because the longer you wait, the harder it is going to be to catch up. It's one of the fun things of research as an innovation tool, but it goes both ways, right? It also means that everyone else on the topic is innovating the most that they can. And then it's important to help you create kind of an AF-neg checklist. So whenever you're affirmative, all the checklist of neg items that you need to be sure that you have answers to when you're researching and preparing for a tournament. And then on the neg, all the affirmatives that you need to make sure that you have links to and that you have answers to and that you're prepared to debate. So it really helps create that checklist of what you need, right? We talked about the to-do list, right? Some of that throughout the season comes from the wiki. Right? A lot of that does, right? Making sure you have answers to whether, you're 2N, making sure you have answers to all the Fs, or 2A, making sure you have answers to all the neg positions that one might read against your affirmative. Right. It also helps you find search terms. Maybe there was a way of describing something that you just couldn't find. Like maybe that's why you weren't finding a lot of literature. It's like you had to start using this phrase, this specific term of art. A lot of different sectors and a lot of different, literature bases have very, very specific search terms, very, very specific terms that they use in their literature and they use in their articles that you might not know as search terms, right? And so by looking at the wiki and realizing what other teams have come up with, you might find some of those search terms that then you're able to turn around and then really branch off of, and doing the process that we talked about again of reading and finding search terms and looking at the footnotes and the works cited and going backwards and all of those things, right? You can kind of get those wheels rolling by the wiki. So consider a wiki kind of access to so many different squad rooms, right? All of those discussions that have happened and all those research and reading come together, kind of centralized, and you're able to tap into that and really then innovate based upon innovations that have already happened. And that's really cool. So I think the wiki is a very important part of a lot of those wheels turning, right? It just gives you access to more conversations that otherwise you wouldn't have. Of course, don't overtrust the wiki. Anything you find on the wiki, you should definitely make sure is legit. You should make sure that authors don't actually go the other way in the conclusions, and you should make sure that whole paragraphs were not omitted. Again, this is important. But I think that not underestimating the wiki and also not discounting the wiki, right? Not thinking that, oh, only lazy debaters go steal cards from the wiki. I mean, maybe, but like the wiki is such an important tool for us to use in our research. And I think that that cannot be understated. Let's talk about databases. Now, as much as we might not love Google as a company, as an organization, right? One cannot help but admire how good they are at, well, Googling things. They are a very good search engine. That's the reason when you look up something in the search engine, it's something called Googling. It's very good at it. So Google has a lot of really cool features. Again, we don't love them, but we do love them at the same time. It's a really complicated relationship here. But of course, the power of quotes. If you've not used the power of quotes, it is really life-changing. Not going to lie, I remember learning about that. I was not in high school. I had been doing debate for 5 years. I was in college. I learned about the quote game. Really changed my life. Any phrase that you're looking for, if you just put in quotes, finds exactly those phrases. It's incredible. And, maybe it's also quotes around the words like should and will and all those words we talked about with the predictive and normative statements, or means if you're finding topicality cards, climate change means, climate change is defined as, all of those things. Oof, quotes, really game changing. Also date range, again, we talked about the recency. So one of the best ways to find more recent evidence that is also more scholarly, as opposed to Google News, which obviously gives you, news articles, but often you're looking for newer articles, but not necessarily news articles. So date range, super helpful. You can also, I recently learned about this, Thank you, Jeff Button, for teaching me this, that you can look by site type. So maybe you're looking for academic articles, maybe you're looking for law reviews, and so you can do search by .edu websites, right? So only edu websites pull up, or maybe only .org websites you want to pull up, right? None of those, shifty.com places, only .org edu. So maybe that's what you're looking for, right? Maybe that's helpful. Something else I do, because again, Google has become just so great, is that I will look for articles, even articles behind paywalls, even things that are on like JSTOR or Springer or LexisNexis. I will look for them on Google, hit the paywall, and once I hit the paywall, then go to my university access, as opposed to searching through those databases on their own. I just think those databases are not optimized at the level that Google is. Again, they don't have the massive funding and all those things, and that's the reason, capitalism. But yeah, that's the way that I do it, is I find the article, then copy paste the article name, often in quotes, because people have stolen Google's quotes thing. And then look that up on the university access, which I think is a really great way to get around paywalls, but also harnessing the power of Google. And of course, using Google Scholars to look at, scholarly articles. Often you get access through that. And then if you can't, then again, you look on your university access, through your university library, and through that you're able to, Google Scholars, you're able to look at articles that cite the article you're looking at, which of course we already talked about is really helpful. Look at like works cited, other pieces by the same author. All of that I think shows up very well and is just so easy to navigate on Google or Google Scholars. So I really like to start there. And then if I can't access it through, basic Google, then I will use the university access, but generally only if I have like the exact quote and name of the article. I don't know. Maybe I'm lazy, but also I kind of love Google. It's on Google Mate, so maybe I shouldn't hate Google that much. I don't know. But don't love them as a corporation, but love their technology. Now, talk about the tagging of evidence. This is something that I don't think enough people talk about, good tags. As someone who has judged so many terrible tags, all sorts of teams, I want to talk about good tagging for a moment. Kind of like I have long rants about claimborn impact. This rant won't be as long, but honestly, it's pretty close to as passionate, right? What is the goal of your tag? Goal of your tag is to summarize your evidence, right? That's what we all say. But the real goal of your tag is so that everyone can flow with a piece of evidence, right? Work backwards. When you're thinking about your tag, what do you want your judge to flow? That's what your judge is going to flow. With very long pieces of evidence, we're probably flowing like whatever random words we hear and we think might become important. Put it in the tag, but don't put too much in the tag. Really think about that we are human, we're not court reporters. Debaters talk too fast for us to do that, and that would just be exhausting to do for 2 hours, so we don't hate ourselves that much. So what do you want the judge to flow? That is what your tag should be. It won't really be that much more. Make it complete sentences, obviously, but don't make a huge block of text that I have to process, because the thing is, you read it to me, I have to process it, then I have to flow it. That's a lot of steps, and if there's like a huge chunk, I can't do that. Like if you've ever heard of like a live interpreter work, right? That there's pauses, right? Where the person speaking speaks and the interpreter interprets and it goes, right? Think of that when you're thinking of tags and flowing debate rounds, right? Is that my brain has to process the words that you're yelling fast at me, and there's a lot of them, and they're very big words, honestly. People don't use those bigger words, honestly, in real life, right? I'm not used to it. So yeah, then I have to type it and like think about it and figure out which words I'm going to put down on my flow, because I can't type that quickly, right? And so when you think of it like this, like think of it like an interpreter, then I think that you'll have more flowable tags, and the tags will be more meaningful and more concise, and just everyone will be happier. Your judges, your opponents, everyone's going to be on the same page. It's going to be great. So first, now that we have that rant done, we read the card. Think about what is the claim, and think, is the claim substantiated? If not, go back to my last rant about warrants. We listen to that, and then think about, how do I find warrants? If this piece of evidence doesn't have warrants, and it's not even in the text, scrap it. Don't read that card. That's not a useful card. Go find one with warrants. then come back to the slide. So if you read the card, figure out what the main claim is, and make sure that it's substantiated in the evidence. Make sure it's a claim warrant impact situation happening, right? So your tag doesn't need to have all the warrants. It's really just important that you have the claim. You can have some warrants if you want, like a word or two, even a short sentence. But mostly it needs to have the claim, whatever you want me to write down. Or if there's a really big reason, there's a really big warrant, a big example that the entire evidence like harps on, then yes, definitely include that in the tag because that's part of the key summary. So you can start by writing the long version, definitely start by that. And now imagine that you're the judge trying to flow this at high speed. You've never heard this tag before in your life. You were not the one who wrote it. It's actually very weird if you're the one who wrote the tags and then you're also the judge. Very uncomfortable. So I much prefer not to have written all the tags that I'm judging. And so think about it like that and then edit it back to something that is flowable and easy to process for the judge, because that's what matters when you're tagging evidence, right? So think of the evidence as what you want. Sorry, think of the tag as what you want your judge to flow about your piece of evidence. I think that's going to make stronger tags. It's going to give you a why of why you're tagging evidence. I think that's so important, again, to really think about the why of everything that you do. Okay. Cool. That was my rant on tagging evidence. Now, let's really quickly, just as a reminder, just as a refresher, kind of the rules or the community norms of cutting cards and producing evidence, because I think this is important to talk about. I know last year there was a very kind of big event where a team lost because an elim round because the evidence didn't meet evidentiary standards in debate round. So we're going to talk about that to make sure whatever evidence you ever cut does not have that problem. So it's important to get that out there. Make sure everyone is following the rules as the debate community have decided upon them. So starting and stopping at paragraphs, not at sentences, at full paragraphs. You don't need to have the entire article per se, right? Or the entire book. That would be a lot. Some articles just keep going on and on and on and on. And back when we printed things, it mattered a lot more. I think now it's just a lot easier to just include the whole article if you can, or the whole chapter, the whole section, or whatever. But back when we printed things more often, this mattered a whole lot more. So starting and stopping at full paragraphs, very, very important. And every single thing in between, again, important. Don't delete paragraphs. There's no consensus on whether or not you need to include footnotes in between. I don't know. Some people do it. Obviously, if you're going to cut some of the footnote, you need to include all of the footnotes that you include. But I don't think you have to include footnotes. But that's up to you. But all of the paragraph, actually like all the body, you have to include every single paragraph. Don't jump around. Don't do ellipses. No one wants the ellipses. Include it all. If it's too long and there's a lot of things in between, cut it into 2 different cards. Like, that's fine. You can be like, Johnson continues, Johnson 2 or whatever you want to call it. That's fine. I'll do this all the time. It's very confusing at first, but it's okay. Yeah, cut it into different cards if you need to. That's fine. Just don't break it up arbitrarily. Like ellipses are not enough. Like recite it. It's a whole new card. Whenever you cut it, whenever you stop, whole new card. Treat it as such. Just don't get yourself into needless trouble. Like, this doesn't make sense to get yourself into trouble over it. Like, not worth losing a debate on something like this. That's so preventable. And then, if possible, be sure to include the URL. You really want, your goal in your citation is that if someone wants to verify and check your evidence, they can. If it is not possible to track down the evidence that you are citing from your citation, redo it. That's not enough. That's not sufficient. That is your gut check. Can I track down this evidence with only this information? If the answer is yes, then you're good. The answer is no, include more things. I'm a fan of not being particularly concise and including everything that might possibly be needed or relevant, because again, then I don't get myself in sticky situations. It's just kind of easier to give people too much information, especially in a world of, again, we're not printing evidence. Like, who cares if it's twice as long? It doesn't harm anyone. Like, a few, extra bytes does not really matter in the grand scheme of thing. Like, that's, believe it or not, what that is not hitting the team. Like, Dropbox maximum is not because I have longer sites. It's because people upload videos. Don't upload videos to your team Dropbox. That uses too much storage for everyone. Don't do that. But yeah, here's the rules. Glad that we've covered them. Don't get yourself or your teammates into sticky situations. It's just not worth doing. Now, activities. So for the last, I think 15 minutes here, we're going to do some fun activities. First has to do with my first rant about claim warrant and impact. As I said passionately, remind you all, that evidence has claim, warrant, and impact, and that's really important, especially warrants. And a clear, concise claim. You want a clear thesis statement. That's going to be really important. So I want you to take a piece of evidence that you read this year, maybe just your favorite piece of debate evidence, whatever that would be, right? I want you to highlight the claim in yellow, highlight the warrants in teal, or like the blue color, and highlight the impact in green. You don't actually have to do these three colors. I don't know. I just chose these three colors, but regardless, you should do them. So think of your piece of evidence. All right, give you a moment. Go find the piece of evidence. Go look in your Dropbox. Go look in your past speech docs, maybe the open source wiki. That's how I find my old debate speeches, honestly. Just go find that. Maybe an old email chain. I think you all use the same team email chain, so that might not be as easy for you all. But go find the piece of evidence. Maybe it's a piece of evidence from you want to see. Maybe it's just a favorite impact card. Okay. Impact cards are really easy for this activity, though. I do actually recommend an impact card. Impact cards obviously have good impact examples. You knew where that was going. Okay. I do have, now that you have your evidence, you can pause it if you need to. Going to show you an example. Again, this is from the money bill affirmative. These seem like good examples. First evidence I found. And so this evidence is about economic inequality and poverty is slowing the economy and unraveling political stability. So the claim here starts off with the UN report. Of course, rampant inequality is harmful, even for people at the top of the income and wealth distributions. And some of the warrants is about unequal society, sustaining less economic growth, the conditions deteriorate, causes recession, positions of power, people in positions of power, tend to capture political processes, and it causes more high inequality. And then what happens? Why do we care? What's the impact? Is that the lack of trust creates a vacuum for authoritarian regimes to take root, and the history of populist regimes since the 1990s has primarily been one of corruption, self-dealing, worsening inequality, and political violence. Specifically, the political violence is the impact here. Right, and you see that so if you go back and look more of the examples, all of the examples of the evidence, again, have big warrants. Often the claim and impact are kind of get muddled, but what's really important is that you have a clear, concise thesis claim and that you have strong warrants backing that up. Those are the two most important things. The impact kind of gets muddled with the claim sometimes, and that's okay. It doesn't have to have necessarily all of them, but as long as it has some form of impact or claim and strong warrants. Again, the warrants are really, really important. Don't under-highlight the warrants. Obviously, if you're reading this in debate round, don't do the three-color scheme. This is just to show you and to help you be able to look through the evidence and find those three things. Because then when you find those three things and evidence that has been cut, when you're researching and when you're cutting cards and when you're reading articles, you are trained, the more you do this, to look for claims. You're trained to look for warrants that substantiate the claims, right? And you're being sure to underline and then ultimately highlight those warrants to read in debate rounds. You don't get grumpy judges like me who are angry about your lack of warrants, right? So that's the purpose of this activity, right? Is the more that you're able to spot those in evidence that you are reading, the more that you're able to spot those in debate rounds and through the files that you already have, the better you're going to be at researching, the better you're going to be at cutting cards whenever you learn to spot the warrants and evidence that does exist, right? So the more that you do this activity, I don't want you to just do this once, right? I want you to do this a few times with a few different pieces of evidence. So you really get in practice of looking for those three things, because when you do that, the quality of arguments that you build with your research are going to be so much stronger. The quality of link change are going to make so much sense, right? You're not going to lose on, probability, or this disad makes no sense, right? Whether that disad is, traditional policy disad, or it's, a disad to the perm and a, methods debate, right? Doing that chain, that link chain, spotting it in evidence, and then being able to reproduce it whenever you're making your own arguments, even if those arguments don't include debate evidence, right? Even if those arguments don't include cards, once you start to be able to recognize the claim warrant impact and be able to make that your own, then you're going to make stronger arguments in the debate space from that knowledge, from that research that you've done. You're going to be able to utilize that in full arguments, right? Whenever you think about the claim, what do you want your judge to flow? It doesn't matter if there's a debate card attached to that or not, right? That any argument you make in the debate space that you want me as a judge to be able to flow, you want that claim clearly laid out. Then you want your warrants and the impact. Why do I care? What does this lead to? What happens next, right? That's what you want in the debate space. And the more that you're able to recognize that, the better debater you're ultimately going to be. So like this sort of activity is so important to you as a researcher, right? And all of those ways and all of those methods, right, is really going to matter. Okay, that's my rant. Again, I think warrants are really important. People don't think they're as important as they should. Now, this is the argument innovation activity. That's next. So I want you to pick a topic paper from the CETA forum, one for next year. Again, the topic vote hasn't happened yet, at least as of recording this. This is my 6th. And I want you to find a solvency advocate for either an affirmative or a negative position, whichever that is, or not a solvency advocate, but maybe a link chain story or an internal link story for this ad, really whichever you want. Or maybe it's a counterplan solvency or whatever, right? And I want you to focus on reading for understanding. Now, unlike the previous activity where you focus on descriptive claims, this is about advocacy. These are advocates. And so I want you to look for normative claims now about what should happen, what ought to happen, right? Because good solvency advocates are going to have those sort of claims about what should happen in the world, what policy should happen, what epistemology should we look to, right? What ontology should we have as prior questions? Like all of those things. How should we solve these problems, right, in the world? What is the best approach? All of those things are normative claims, right? And that's how you find the advocates, your solvency advocates. That's how you find your alt advocates. All of those things exist within normative claims and normative evidence, right? So I want you to focus on normative claims now instead of descriptive claims, right? Descriptive claims are really important for when you're learning first about a topic, right? But when you're trying to utilize it more in debate and get that action step that debate gives you, then it's important, I think, to focus on normative claims. Right. So now, after you read for understanding and you focus on normative claims, after that, only after that, think about how the argument functions in debate, right? And once you start thinking about that on your own, start writing out notes, take a pen to paper, or maybe it's in a Word doc, whatever. And now talk about it with a teammate, a coach, or a debate friend. We all have friends from different teams that are like our good debate friends. So talk about it with someone that that's a debate mind with you, and take notes of that conversation. Really write down what they have to say. Like really, think about this. This is something that when we were preparing for CETA together, that I remember all of those long discussions that Sam, Hannah, Lorraine, and I had that were just so helpful to think about the app and all those moving pieces. Think about the neg, right? And taking notes of those conversations and really the knowledge production and research that happens between people was so important to really make it an affirmative, to make it a negative position. And so I want you to do that as well. So start taking notes of those conversations, but first really think about how it functions and how it plays out, right? And then through that, that's how you produce that argument innovation, right? And so then, of course, you're going to repeat. You're going to repeat until the end of the school year. You're going to repeat until March or April, just continually on the topic. Maybe you guessed right what the topic was going to be on the topic paper in your head of the game. If not, then your ability to innovate and your ability to think of, um, the topic to the solvency advocate, to the normative claim, to how it functions in debate, to talking through your position, whether it be an affirmative or a negative position, right, is really the process of innovating arguments. So the better you get at innovating the argument, the better that you're going to get no matter what the topic is. And this is a really important research skill. Um, so, especially before the topic areas announced, just keep moving along the different topic areas, right? And keep thinking about what makes sense as a position on either side. If you're a 2A or 2N, or if you don't know, just kind of maybe pick some of each. I don't know, whatever makes you happy. I personally prefer to think about neg positions than I do affirmatives. So, I would always pick the neg. But again, up to you, up to kind of what you think your roles will be next year. So yeah, just keep repeating ad infinitum. Yeah, and through this process, I think you'll become a lot bit of a debate mind, right, and researcher mind as it goes. So yeah, that is all I have on the research lecture. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. My email is victoriayonter@debateboutique.com. And yeah, I look forward to any questions about research, any of my, more tips and tricks if you want to dive into deeper with something, or maybe you want to have some of those conversations with us Debate Boutique that I talked about with argument innovation and really thinking about your research. So maybe that's what you want to do. But good luck on your research and really rethinking what research means, and not just thinking about research as let's go and let's cut cards, let's write a new app. Really starting the topic this year, fresh slate, fresh topic for everyone, and really thinking about it as an academic researcher and thinking about really those skills that you want to have when you leave debate, and how you can best foster those through the activity, and how you can become really the best debater version of yourself and the best researcher version. So thank you for joining me, and I look forward to emails and working with you all.